Get $10 off your next $50 or more purchase when you sign up for text alerts from Academy Sports and Outdoors. Text the word fishing to 22369. Once again, that's fishing to 22369. Offer expires 7/31 of 2022, and message and data rates may apply.
Fisherman's Post. More fish, more often.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fisherman's Post Saltwater Podcast series. This episode is titled Old Drum Fishing on the Neuse, and I'm going to be talking to Captain Joe Caprarola of Cap's Fishing Charters. He's working out of the Neuse River area. We'll begin our discussion with gear, move on to using electronics, cork techniques, cut bait techniques, and then, of course, fighting and handling the fish. I'm Gary Hurley of Fisherman's Post. Fisherman's Post has been serving the saltwater fishing community of North Carolina since 2003. We've been bringing you fishing reports, fishing information, fishing tournaments, fishing schools, and here in our latest and greatest effort, the Fisherman's Post Saltwater Podcast series, where we reach out to our captain and guide friends from up and down the North Carolina coast and ask them to share with us their thoughts, their insights on how to catch more fish more often. And in this endeavor, I'm joined every week by my podcast partner, Billy Thorpe Creative. All right, Billy, old drum time. It's that time of year.
Man, it's good. Old guys talking about old drum. Well,
one old guy.
One old guy. And I mean, it's gonna be fun. I'm always excited to hear how you catch these grandpa fish, because I think they're like 60, 70 years old or whatever. Anyway, look at me. I'm talking like I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, man, don't do that. We talked about you not trying to do that, man.
I just want to be a part of the cool kids club, Gary. Dang it. All right, well, I'll do what I do best. I'll talk about our sponsors. How's that, Gary? Is that better?
Perfect.
All right, here we go. First up, we got Bland Landscaping Company. So Kurt and his guys over there, Bland Landscaping, have been in business for over 46 years. They actually have over 500 employees, which is pretty crazy, but just goes to say that they are an awesome employer, and they are actively searching for field managers, crew leaders, and production supervisors across all of the markets that they serve. So if you're in the market for a new job, if I make a couple more old jokes to Gary, maybe that's me. Maybe I'm wearing this hat as an employee, not as a sponsor representative. But yeah, go check those guys out, man. They're an awesome group, and they're outdoorsmen and women, and they're looking for some good positions over there. So
I like that they get it. They get that people are more discerning now and looking for a job, especially a career, and they get it. They want to take care of you. They want to retain you. They want to give you benefits. And they are absolutely worth a look. I highly encourage it.
100%. All right, now our next up, we got Marine Warehouse Center. Get a quick word from them, and we'll be right back.
At Marine Warehouse, we have everything. We have new boats, we have parts, we have accessories, new trailers, we have a complete service department with highly trained technicians. Anything you need to get out on the water, we have.
At Marine Warehouse Center, as we've grown over the last few years, now have a large selection of marine supplies from start to finish for all your boating needs.
What I love about this region is to be able to get out on the water, and also we love to be able to get you out on the water.
The best part of working at Marine Warehouse is being able to get involved with the customers and share a love for the water.
All right.
Good dudes.
Good dudes, good business, lots of fun, always keeping us entertained. I don't know who entertains them. Like, they entertain us more, we entertain them more, but we're trying.
I don't know the answer to that either. That's a good one.
Yeah, man. But I tell you what, that Emmett over there, dude, he's pretty entertaining. And he's been kind of rogue lately. Like,
traveling again?
He's been traveling again. He's been rogue. He's been out in the wild, and so some photos were snapped, and I got one. And I'll give you a little bit of a hint, Gary.
Wait, let's name that. Let's remind people where in the world is Emmett.
Where in the world is Emmett?
All right.
Is the name of this bit.
I'm ready for my first clue.
And this is not made up at all by Gary. Actually, not at all by Gary. But this is real. This is a real picture. I'll give you a little hint. Emmett, Emmett's a pilot.
Yeah.
So he likes to fly airplanes, but he also likes to fly other things as well. Can you guess what he was doing in this picture that I'm about to show you?
Flying planes, and he would be no, I don't have a guess.
All right, so I'll go ahead and show you. Here's Emmett. He is flying a kite. Look at that.
I almost said hot air balloon, But I like
Yeah.
this one better. Man, that Emmett is sure enthusiastic no matter what he's doing. Look at that
him.
smile.
Yeah, man. I didn't realize he had like a six-pack. He got ripped arms and everything. Look at that. And if you guys are listening to this podcast and not watching it, you need to go to YouTube immediately, look up Fisherman's Post, and see these photos. But this is Emmett frolicking about in a wheat field or some overgrown grass, flying his kite. So he's a pilot.
Very proud. He's very proudly flying his kite in his yellow shirt.
Yeah, with two of his abs popping out. Anyway, this show is going downhill fast, Gary. After all these episodes, this is how we go out.
We thought we were rock bottom with bad Terrell jokes, and then
Well, so I'll show you a picture that people actually want to see. Okay,
right.
how about that? Here we go. We got Braxton Davenport from Washington with a 45-inch red drum. He was fishing with cut bait in the Pamlico Sound. So yeah, good-looking fish. I think that fish is bigger than the kid holding it, actually. So good for you, Braxton.
yeah, good for Braxton.
Yeah, here we are in this hot podcast studio. Braxton's out there showing off pictures of 40-plus inch fish.
I get it, man.
But hopefully we'll learn how to catch one after this episode. So that'll be good.
And we're gonna guess that Braxton is a member of our weekly inshore fishing reports. I'm just going to assume
100%.
that. I mean, if you're catching
100%.
fish, then it's got to be because you are a member of the Fisherman's Post weekly inshore fishing reports offered at fishermanspost.com. Look at the member content tab. And so for a small fee, you can access weekly inshore fishing reports from 11 different areas from up and down the entire North Carolina coast, video and audio delivery method. We talk to each captain for about 4 to 7 minutes, and they share a lot of details, and they give you advice, your best chance to catch a fish for the weekend ahead. Released on Thursdays, so we have the Weekender Best Bet as part of our fishing reports. Very popular, and I would say we're proud of the efforts and love collaborating with the great amount of captains we have assimilated for that project.
Yeah, man, it is a ton of fun, and there's a lot to learn. And also, I'll mention this, Gary, because I know some people early on were like, I would do it, but I don't want to like listen to the whole thing. I want to listen to my section. And we actually have it marked out in chapters. So if you want to listen to it or watch it, it's all chaptered out. So you can just fast forward to whatever sections you want to listen to and listen to them that way. So
Smart.
Just yeah, you know what? I mean, that's why I get paid the big bucks, because I'm big brain, big head, big brain. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, I'll let you guys get to talking about old stuff and not big stuff.
All
well,
right.
Old and big, I guess.
All right, but remember, Billy's best takeaway.
I'm going to be ready for it, Gary.
Billy's best takeaway. All right, well, let me welcome to the show Captain Joe Caprarola, Caps Fishing Charters, working out of the Neuse River area. Let's talk about old drum fishing on the Neuse. Captain Joe, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Gary, thanks for having me. I appreciate you guys.
Well, sure, man.
looking forward to it.
I'm very excited to talk about old drum fishing in the Neuse River, in the Neuse area. But as tradition goes, you've got 2 questions to work through before we get to the main event. You tell me you're ready. I give you
All
question
right.
number 1.
I'm ready.
All right, question number 1. So why should we spend the next 30 or so minutes listening to you talk about an old red drum?
Well, it's a good question. I think that, I've been out here fishing on this river about 10 years total, and fishing for old drum is absolutely my favorite thing and the best time of year, I feel, to be on the river. It's a trophy drum, fishery, and every year around the same time, we get the opportunity for these fish to come in and start breeding, and we take advantage of catch and release and getting those trophy fish and in the boat. And I think I've got a lot to learn still, but I've been doing it for a few years, and it's really what I concentrate on. So I spend a lot of my time really studying and perfecting the art of old drum fishing.
All right. Acceptable. We move on to question number 2, and as tradition goes, question number 2 is a non-fishing related question. So I'm playing off of your charter name, Caps Fishing Charters. So your question has to do with bottle caps. Are you ready?
Okay. Sure.
Best guess. What are the most bottle caps removed with the mouth in 30 seconds? Guinness Book of World Records. Most bottle caps removed by the mouth in 30 seconds.
I'm just going to guess and say 56.
That is a good guess. It's 45, but I like how you're going there with 45.
Nice.
All right,
That was close.
You were close. All right, I got another one though. There's my follow-up. Most bottle caps removed by a parrot in 1 minute. That's another Guinness Book of World Records. I'm not making this up. Guinness Book of World Records. Most bottle caps removed by a parrot in 1 minute.
In a minute. Okay. Let's say 21.
Reverse it, and you're right. 12. How about that?
I thought 12 when you were saying it, and I thought it was too low.
Yeah, and I thought flying a kite when Billy asked me about Emmett, but I didn't say it. I get
That's
you,
right.
man. All right, let's talk about Old Red Drum. In my notes here, we're going to talk about gear first, then we're going to move into using electronics to find fish. And I know people are probably most curious about finding fish, but gear is important, so let's start it there. Talk to me about gear for Old Red Drum fishing on the Neuse.
Okay, sure. So what I like to use and what I've found to be most effective is either a medium heavy or a heavy action 7-foot rod. I use mostly TFO rods, and that's just what I prefer. They have a lot of backbone, and that's why I use those heavier rigs. And for reels, I'm using a 4000 series reel with a 30-pound braid and a 50-pound leader. That has never failed me. I know people use bigger, and some people go a little bit smaller, but I think 30-pound braid is perfect for what we're doing. It allows you to cast the cork or the bottom rig a good distance, and it also allows you to connect with the fish immediately as they take that cork down without any kind of line stretch or anything like that. And the 50-pound leader I use simply because there's usually a lot of bluefish in the area. If they come chomping at your bait, they don't cut you off immediately. But also, again, you don't lose the fish as easy if you try to lighten the leader. Another thing that I will use is, you want to talk about rods and reels, but I mean, as far as line, we had covered that. I guess we could talk about hooks and lures. Corks and stuff.
Yeah, man. I would say I'm gonna I'm gonna guess though the reason you use medium heavy is because of the backbone about bringing the fish in expediently and not stressing the fish with a long fight.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what I'm trying to do, right? We're catching these fish; they're in here breeding. You can't keep them. I don't even think they'd be that good to eat anyway. But you want to get them in the boat and back in the water as quickly as possible. So I've caught fish on medium light 410 rods with 20-pound braid. 10-pound braid and 20-pound leader, and it's a fight for sure. And you usually got to chase them down, but it takes a lot longer with these bigger, heavier rods. You can still get the same action on your lure or your cork, but you're getting the fish in a lot faster, and it gets you right back on the fish because a lot of times you're following a big school of bait, or you're on top of a big school of bait, and when those old drum run, if you spend 15, 20 minutes getting them in the boat, you're going to lose that bait and then spend another 20 minutes trying to find it.
All right, so yeah, man, that does the rod and reel and line. So I would love to hear about terminal tackle, and let's start with corks and then go to bottom rigs.
Okay, great. So the corks, I got a couple here. Let's see. So this is the blabbermouth. I'm sure anybody that's over old drumfish has seen this. It's a big, heavy, plastic, loud cork. I use these a lot, but these have also damaged my elbow to the point where I can't pull them through the water anymore. Every year I get tennis elbow, and it's because of these corks. So I switched my rods, the ones that I'm using. I'll put clients on this bigger blabbermouths because I think they do tend to work better, but these small little 4 horseman corks, they have a scoop on them. They displace a lot of water. They're lightweight and they cast just as good as the bigger cork, but they're easier for me to pull in, and they're just as effective, I feel. But as far as those two corks is just what I prefer. If you're going to use a cork, it doesn't have to be those brands. It could be anything that's got the concave kind of top, because basically what you're doing is you're dragging that cork on top of the water, making a big splash. You're not just clicking it. and you wanted to simulate an old drum feeding at the top of the water. And the only way to do that is with a big cork with a big concave top that'll displace the water.
All right, so
And as far as, okay.
man, do you tie the braid right to the bobber, or you're tying the 50-pound leader to the bobber?
So what I do is I'll use about 4 to 5 inches of leader above the cork, between the braid and the cork. And what that does is it keeps the braid away from the metal and because these blabber mounts just have a little swivel on them. And if you put braid on that, when it gets to the water, it's going to fall and then it gets wrapped up. And then if you do hook into a fish and you got braid wrapped up all around this cork, it's probably going to break off or not be as effective. So I put about 5, maybe 6 at the most, inches of 50-pound fluorocarbon on top of that, just to keep it so when it does fall in, it falls away from the cork and not into the top of it.
Yeah, I like that. That makes sense. So now talk to me about what you do below the cork.
All right, so below the cork, I'm using the same fluorocarbon. I'm using 50-pound. I got some J braid here. It's usually what I buy because you can buy a big roll for relatively cheap. And I'm using just uni knots, nothing fancy on both ends. And then I'm using a 6/0 for a 1/4 ounce jig head. This is the TT lures, Z-Man. If you can see this one, it does have a little bit of a bend to it. It's been used, so it's been pulled out just a little bit, but it's still 100% usable. And this cork's got some rust on it. The jig head's got some rust. It's been probably 3 years I've had that one. I've been putting it in circulation. But that's what I'm using with the DOA airhead baits. The 1/4 ounce helps them fall pretty good and gives it a lifelike action. But what I will say is under the cork, I use about 2 to 3 foot a leader. I know it's kind of a long leader, so you have this big rig that you're casting into the water, but the more that lure has to fall, the farther down it goes. I feel like it's more effective. Plus, if you do get bit off by a bluefish or something, you still have a decent amount of leader to tie another hook and bait onto. You don't have to, mess around with tying a whole new leader on the bottom of that cork.
All right, I got some follow-up questions.
Okay.
All right, so on that jig head, you said 1/4 ounce?
Yeah, it's 1/4 ounce 6/0, so it's pretty big.
And what else do you like about that specific jig head that you held that up? Like, is there other elements of it that you found work better than other jig heads?
So, I don't know if you can see this. I'll try to hold it up to the camera here. So it has this death grip type, bait keeper on it. So when you put this on the bait, it doesn't slip down. It goes. I'm just gonna rig this up real fast. It sits just like this, and that bait isn't gonna slide off the hook. So traditional jig heads will have a bait keeper at the top, and so this one has one in the middle of the shaft, so it doesn't pull as far and doesn't move as much. This bait's a little worn out, so it's not the perfect example, but it also, with this hook, the length of it, with it being 6/0 on these DOA airheads, it fits perfectly in the middle of that bait, and it's the perfect size for this particular bait. This is a 5-inch bait. It's supposed to look like a Manhattan, and it's absolutely killer.
All right, so you started hitting on what was going to be my second, so I was going to follow up on the soft plastic. So is that your go-to soft plastic? And then I would, you already answered the other question I had, 5 inches. And then the other question I had is you're mostly looking for Menhaden mimicking, but what about colors? What about that bait? And then what about other potential soft plastic opportunities?
Okay. So the DOA airhead, the 5-inch bait is my go-to if there's Menhaden around. So 9 times out of 10, there's going to be Menhaden, big schools of Menhaden. That's what the fish are after. I do have some Z-Man swimmers that are more of a mullet type bait. The thing with Z-Man though is these baits are 6-inch and they look more like a mullet. There's been times where they've been chasing big schools of mullet and they're not hitting these DOA airheads because they're not mimicking the natural bait that's in the river. So, but the Z-Mans will require a bigger hook because they're more buoyant, and if you use that little 6/0 quarter ounce, it doesn't fall as effectively as if you go with a bigger and heavier hook. So when you do take that into effect, if you're using Z-Man stuff, it does float. So you usually have to use more weight to bring it down to the level where you want it to go as quickly. But
what about color?
then,
Do you spend much time thinking about color?
Not really. A lot of the color stuff that I have is either some sort of white with fleck, flake, either gold or silver, or chartreuse and white, or a black with gold. I mean, they really don't care. I normally will put 3 or 4 different colors on the rods, and they'll hit all of them. They don't care. They're just eating everything that they can get their hands or their mouth around. So I don't think they're that picky. There is one color though that I've used in the past that I've never caught an old drum on, and I steer clear of it, and that's that pink and green. I forget the name of the color, but it's pink and green, and it just doesn't work for me. So
Electric
I try
chicken?
to stick with. Yeah, it's similar to that. But it's more of a dark green bottom with a pink top. It's odd. It's not a normal electric chicken, but that's the color I stay away from. But that's just my preference. I'm sure there's people out there that clean up on that bait. Who knows? But I try to stick with a dark top and a contrasting color.
Okay.
They make them with red heads. They make them with just white. I feel like something with either some sparkle in it or just the contrasting color is usually the best bet. Because the Manhattan are, they look like they're dark on top and white on the bottom. So if you have that contrast that mimics that bait, it doesn't have to be the exact color, but it does help.
All right, I got one more question, and then we're going to move on to finding fish. You ever employ like Procure? Are you putting any scent on it, or it's a visual hit? It doesn't matter.
No, it's a good question, and I should have covered that. So that's another reason why I like these DOAs. So they have this giant like slot in the middle, and when you hook it up, when you hook this on, you put the hook through and then feed it out and then stick it through. But there's you could put like an ounce of Procure in there, and that's what I use. I use a big bottle of Procure, and I usually will use the Inshore or the Manhattan scent or the mullet scent. I have the big bottles because when you're out here fishing with these lures, you wind up using a lot of it. And instead of putting it on the side, I usually put it in the middle, and that'll leave a trail of a scent trail out in the water for longer periods of time. But yeah, definitely Procure is a lifesaver out there.
All right, now, and again, we said at the beginning, I think this is where people are most curious about finding fish. I know you have in the notes using electronics to find fish, but hit me up in general, help the audience out, because they want to know, how do we find these big reds? Because there's so much water in the Neuse and the Pamlico, so many areas they could be. Help us out.
Okay, yeah. So I normally will use my electronics to locate the bait balls, and the only time I ever do that is in the summer when I'm locating old drum, or in the wintertime when I'm fishing the deeper holes for trout. The rest of the time I don't even look at my electronics other than my maps, because I'm fishing 2, 3, 4, 5 feet of water, and it doesn't show me anything anyway. So, but I feel like when you're old drum fishing out in the Neuse, you tend to be in deeper water, and the bait balls that are out there are not always going to be on top of the water. You're not always going to see them panicking or fluttering or just swimming around. They're going to be low enough to where you can't see them, and you have to rely on your electronics to find them. So, but I feel like the sonar portion of the electronics is important, but what I target mostly is the mapping portion. So I'm looking at my maps, my chart, and I'm looking for shallow to deep real fast. So coming off of a shoal, it might be 6 feet out for 200-300 yards, and then drop off to 10 to more feet, and that's what I'm looking for, because that's usually where, if the bait's not on top of the shoal, they're usually hanging off somewhere on that drop. So maybe the 15 feet of water, and then it's 6 feet, 20 yards away, and they're somewhere in the middle between 9 and 8 feet. You're never going to see them on top of the water, so you have to look at your maps and understand where these drop-off points are, and really try to target them and follow those drop-off points with your map, while simultaneously using your sonar to locate the bait balls, because they're out there, and then wherever there's bait, there's going to be old drum.
So you're visually looking for bait, but you can't make a living on that. You also have to look for bait using your electronics and just finding them below the surface with electronics. And then separate from that, or I mean, ideally in conjunction with the bait, or in these other areas where there's drop-offs, and the drop-offs, the fish could be on the high side, it could be on the deep side. And are these drop-offs, like, what do you like? Do you like a drop-off like along the river bank? I know that there's some lumps out in the middle. Like, what have you found to be more productive more consistently?
So I think in the main river, there's a lot of spots that you're looking at the river, you're just sliding along. You have no idea that just 100 yards to your right, it's 5 to 4 feet deep. There's no crab pots out there. There's nothing out there. And then where you're running, it's 8, 9 feet. So what I look for is I really just study my map. I use the Navionics charts. I have the card in my chart plotter, and that gives me a 1 foot depth line. So it really helps me pinpoint those areas where it's shallow for a big area and then just drops off, and then the rest of the middle of the river is 18 to 20 feet. So, but they use those ledges as little highways just to kind of travel around the river and find this bait. But I mean, the middle of the river will definitely hold fish. If you see a bait ball in the middle of the river, definitely stop it and fish it, because you can't just pass it and be like, oh, there's probably nothing there, because there probably is. But definitely, I mean, outside the creeks, there's a big shoal that everybody goes to out past Oriental. I mean, I stay away from it because it's always busy. But anywhere, if you're using your maps correctly and just seeing like, oh, okay, there's a big shoal, and by I mean a shoal, it's shallow and then deep, and it sticks out way into the middle of the river. Those are the areas that you want to target for sure.
Man, I got a couple of more questions. So will you fish a shoal like that without any sign of bait, or will, just because that's a highway and that they'll come through there, or do you kind of require to see bait if you're going to spend any time at an area?
So I have a couple of spots that I've historically done very well without any sign of bait. And I will always go back to them, and if they're not showing bait, I'll still hit them up, and I'm still catching fish, because if you're using your sonar, especially, it's only a little cone under the boat. The bait it might be under the boat at the time as you ride by, but it could be right outside of that cone, so you miss it. It doesn't mean it's not there, but I think if I'm pulling up to an area where I think the fish might be, I'm definitely relying on seeing bait and either finding it on top of the water underneath. But if I roll it to a spot and it's a deep drop off like I'm looking for and there's no signs of life, I usually will move on, or I'll move further down around the other side of the shoal and see if there's bait or fish over there.
Okay.
But that's basically what I'm doing.
Then my other question is, when you're in that search mode and you're just sort of covering water, looking for bait, looking for birds, looking for fish, looking for other habitat, like, are you planed out, or are you going slow? Like, what is the ideal search speed where you're covering water but you're not potentially riding over a missing opportunity?
That's a great question, because I mean, I will plane out and I don't get any kind of reading on my stuff. So usually I'm just kind of trolling along at like a no wake zone type speed. I'll find an area and I'll be like, all right, I'm gonna just putz around and kind of slowly go over this stuff until I find something. And if you go too fast, you might miss something, and your sonar might be the greatest, and it probably won't pick up the bait ball, or you'll skim over it, and it won't look like anything, but it could be a giant ball of bait. So definitely, if you're going to patrol these areas, definitely slow it down. You'll have a better result at the end.
Okay, man. So now I'm going to transition. We found an area. You have found an area that you believe to be productive. You like it. You know, whether it's bait, whether history, or whatever the elements are. Walk me through the basics of pop and cork technique. You know, what would I expect if I was on your boat?
So a lot of the times when I do find these areas and there's bait around, sometimes you get lucky and there's old drum rolling on top of the water, and they might be far away, and you roll up to them with your trolling motor on, because if you use the big motor, you're going to scare them away. So if I'm throwing a popping cork, my technique that I tell myself and my friends and everybody that I get on my boat and fish old drum with me, is just to drag the cork across the surface and then just let it hang out for 25, 30 seconds. It's a slow process. If you fish it the cork's too fast, you'll probably not hook up as much. I've found that in the past that I started corking too fast, and I wasn't getting any bites, and I moved on, and I had somebody else on my boat, and they're pulling that cork and just like looking at their phone and not paying attention, and then all of a sudden they're catching the fish, and I'm not, because I'm moving it too fast. So, but definitely when you're pulling these corks, you want to drag them sideways. So you're not just popping the rod. What I do is I hold it in my hand, I turn my body to the right, and I just kind of twist my torso so that this thing just goes and just drags across the bottom, makes a huge, a big air bubble basically under the water, and that simulates an old drum rolling. If you've ever seen one roll, you know what I'm talking about. And the same with the smaller corks that I use too. They do the same thing. They have a totally different sound, and they don't make as big as an air pocket, but they work just as effectively. But I think that dragging the cork and waiting that extra time is key to success out there.
All right. And so if I'm on your boat and we come up against a big bait pod, am I instructed to cast around the edges of the bait pod, past the bait pod, and pull it through? Like, what's your opinion of best approach to bait pod corking?
Oh, that's a great question. So in my experience, I find these big bait balls, and I've thrown corks right in the middle of them, and they kind of spread around it and just keep going. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a bluefish bite, because I'm not under the water. I don't know what's going on down there, but I know that there's fish actively feeding on big schools of menhaden. So from my experience, when you cast into the school, you're either not going to get anything, or a bluefish is going to pull you down and chop your bait in half. So I think what's going on down there is that these bluefish are, they're crazy out there. They're fast, they're hungry, and they're just chomping all these menhaden up into little bits. And the old drum are usually behind that, following the bait and just kind of cleaning up the scraps. So what I do is I find these big bait balls, and they might be splashing and going crazy, and I won't throw it in the school. I'll throw it behind it, whatever direction they're moving. I try to get behind them and cast behind them. And I let them get a little far away, not too far, but I usually like to cast at the back of them and let it hang out. And I've had better success doing that. And I've given people in the past that same advice. They ask me, hey, what should I be doing, with these bait balls? Cast behind them and just wait. And that's usually when you get a bite. But I feel like, in my experience, that casting in the middle of the school has been less productive than hanging out behind it.
All right. This is where I say, any other thoughts on pop and cork before I ask you about cut bait?
Sure. Yeah, pop and corks are great. They are a little slow, especially the way I fish them, but I have had way more success on corks than I have cut bait. only because I fish corks 9 times out of 10. There's also conditions that will allow you really to not fish corks. If it's really windy and choppy and gross out there, I mean, there's a lot of commotion at the top of the water. You're probably not going to get as good as a bite as if you were to throw cut bait. So if it's really crappy out there and conditions aren't good, I will stick with the bottom rigs because they're more productive than trying to throw a cork on top of in 10 to 12 mile per hour winds. It's not as productive. But yeah, the cork, and just make sure you're doing a long, slow drag through the water and not a quick, just a pop like you would if you're using just an oval popper for redfish and trout like you would, any other time of year.
All right, so now I want you to tell me about your bottom rig for cut bait, and then I guess like a similar scenario. You've pulled up to an area you believe would be most productive cut bait fishing. Tell me what to expect on your boat once we get to that zone where you want to cut bait fish. But first, the rig.
Okay. So the rig is I use the standard North Carolina old drum rig. If you go on the North Carolina Marine Fisheries webpage, they have a specific rig that they want you to use. And through biologist research, they've figured out that this specific rig is the best way to use it the best one to use because the fish aren't gut hooking themselves because the leader is only 6 inches long underneath of that weight. So I actually don't have one with me to show you, but the Lupton rig is what everyone around here calls them. But I mean, you can go to any tackle store around here, and they already have them pre-made. And there's a certain North Carolina regulation that tells you exactly what it can be. And a lot of that, too, is the pinched barb. So if you're fishing, especially at night, I think the regulation says that you can't use anything smaller than a 4-aught, and the barb has to be pinched if you're fishing the hours of night. So any of these pre-rigged rigs that you buy at the store are already going to have the barb pinched. So and that can be problematic if you're throwing mullet and other cut bait on there because it will just slip off because there's really no barb there to hold anything in. But I'm using the same rods, the same reels, the same line, everything else. And instead of having a cork on top of the water, you're just throwing that big 2 or 3 ounce weighted hook on the bottom and just kind of waiting for something to pick it up.
So I'm guessing you're anchored and you're fan casting. How many rods do you typically fish?
I will usually throw, if I'm fishing strictly the bottom, I always try to have 4 rods out, and I'll kind of just fan cast them outside the back of the boat. On my boat, all the rod holders are towards the back. I don't have rails or anything up front, so I don't have any rod holders up there. But I'll throw one out to the left, one out left center, right center, and then way out to the right, and just kind of sit around and wait. I use my trolling motor anchor, but I found that trying to move slowly across the water and drag that bait on the bottom isn't as effective as just sitting in one place and waiting. It's my least favorite way to fish, but it is effective. And a lot of times if you're trying to drag bait on the bottom, it will tend to come off the hook. So you'll sit there for 10, 15 minutes with nothing biting, and reel it in, there's nothing on your hook. And that's not a good feeling because it makes you feel like, oh, I missed a bite or the crab's got me or something. But if you're moving around, you definitely are going to drag that bait on the bottom and it's going to come off the hook, especially with those pinched barbs.
All right, now tell me your favorite cut of pogey to put on that hook, your favorite cut of mullet. I'm kind of looking at like what part of the mullet, what part of the pogey, and how big a cut.
So I'm a big believer in the tail. It is absolute garbage. I never use it on any of those fish. If I'm using pogies, they're super mushy. Even if you get a net full of them and throw them in your live well, or you snag one, as soon as you pick one up, it just seems to die. Right? It's a really finicky bait. I usually use the head, I'll cut it in half. If I got a 6-inch pogey, I'll cut it in 2 pieces. And I'll use the head on one, I'll cut the tail off the other one and hook it through the back fin. And then if on the front, I'll use the mouth as the hook point, because it's harder than the rest of the bait. They don't, I don't know, they don't stay on the hook very well. Same thing with mullet. Don't throw away the heads. The heads are awesome. I've had some of my best days on just mullet head. And a lot of times the fish will grab it, hook themselves, and you'll reel them in, and the head will still be on that hook, and you can throw it right back out there. The middle of the mullet, like the steaks, if you cut them in, I usually cut them in about 1.5 inch steaks or so. And what I'll try to do is get as much skin as I can through the hook, so I have better, more longevity of the bait on the hook. Because a lot of times I feel like mullet is a great bait to use, but it's probably the one that falls off the hook the most. And maybe I could just be doing it wrong, but I've hooked pinfish and other things, and I've never had the same outcome as mullet. It just seems to always disappear.
All right. Well, I tell you what, we are coming towards the end, but I do want to talk about handling the fish. I know that was in your notes. I know that's important when it comes to old red drum fishing. So I guess you can talk to me a little bit about how you play the fight, but then I'm guessing you're going to spend a little bit more time on caring for the fish once it's to the boat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so absolutely. It's important to make sure that you're handling these fish correctly. That's why I use those bigger rods, because it helps me get the fish in the boat faster. A lot of times you'll hook up to your cork will go down, and that thing will take off, and it'll run 50 yards away, and you just wait for it to stop and start reeling it in. And when it gets to the boat, it usually takes off again. And but definitely make sure you have a good landing net, a big one that will fit that fish in there. I've been unfortunate and been on the boat and forgot my net. Had to use my fish grip pliers to lip them and then kind of grab them by the tail and pick them up. And but basically what you want to do is keep that fish as horizontal as you can. I mean, it's an old fish, it's heavy. If you can imagine someone picking you up by your ears or your neck, it's not going to feel good. So if you're picking them up by the gills and just pulling them straight vertical out of the water, or just holding them up for a picture, it's not good for the fish. But definitely get them to the boat, get your picture taken, hook out, everything. Do that as quickly as possible. I like to keep the fish out of the water as least amount as possible, because it just helps them, carry on with what they're doing. They're here to spawn and make more redfish. So while we can catch them, it's better practice to try to salvage them at all costs. Especially when you do release that fish, you can't just throw it in the water head first and expect it to swim. If you do that, the chances of survival are going to be lessened drastically than if you were to actually care for that fish, put it in the water, kind of swim the tail. I mean, they're doing a lot of fighting. They're swimming around, and they build up a lot of lactic acid in them, and they kind of freeze up. So if you've ever handled one of these big fish and you put it in the water and it just doesn't do anything, you're just like, come on, man, let's go. And you kind of swim his tail. And I found that sometimes they kick right off and you can let them go and they swim away, and sometimes it takes a minute or two for them to build back up that energy to move around. But I've had really good luck with patting them on the belly, tell them thank you, and just kind of, and for whatever reason they don't like that, and they just and they're gone. So they have no life in them. You rub their tummies and there they go. But yeah, I think you definitely caring for that fish. I mean, it gave you a good fight. For some people, it's a fish of a lifetime, and they might never get a chance to do it again. So it's always good practice just to return the favor to them and let them go safely and humanely.
Well, I would like to thank you very much for your talk tonight, Captain Joe Caprarola, Cap's Fishing Charters, operating out of the Neuse River area. Yeah, man, I think we're all excited for red drum season. It's great to be talking big red drum with you, and appreciate your time. Appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I look forward to this summer, and I can't wait for the old drum to really kick off here shortly. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. Take care, Joe.
All right, thanks.
Billy,
Gary, big reds, man.
old drum in the Neuse River.
Oh yeah, man, it's good. I've only caught a couple of those, the old guys, but they're a lot of fun. And one thing that I guess I'll move right into Billy's best takeaway.
Okay.
There you go. I don't need you to set me up, Gary. After 100-some episodes,
Okay.
I'm solid. I got this. Well, I thought one thing he said was like use your mapping charts. Like I think technology is huge for finding fish, but to really look for those shallow to deep drop-offs and like in between. If you find those two spaces, then like go in between them because you're gonna find some bait there. So I thought that was pretty interesting to figure out, use your mapping charts or whatever your technology, but then play within those two lines. I feel like that takes this huge body of water and closes it in a little bit tighter. So
Yeah, I like his analogy because they use them like highways. They use
Yeah.
it to sort of guide their path, sort of wandering around, looking to be comfortable, looking
Yeah.
to eat.
that's what I do. I'm on a highway to Chick-fil-A, baby. Let's go. No, actually, not really, but not as much anymore. Oh, man. Well, just want to shout out to our sponsors. Again, Marine Warehouse Center. Thank you so much. Blaine Landscaping Company. And this episode as well, Academy Sports for sponsoring the show. Be sure to support our sponsors as much as you can because they make the show possible. And yeah, keep it free. So, yeah, go check that out. And then also fishing reports. So that's good. If you don't know how to catch these fish or where they're at, fishing reports kind of like a weekly reminder of how to get out there and get it done and what's going on. Like you don't have to go do all the work. Somebody's going to tell you the work they've done.
Yeah.
So it's a little cheat code.
We're all looking for an advantage.
Absolutely, man. Well, Gary, I appreciate it, man, and we'll see you next week.
Fisherman's